and I will introduce the event and then hand over to Wajid to get us started. So the groundbreaking Tape Letters project was launched by Modus Arts to unearth, archive and represent a portrait of the cultural heritage of Pakistani immigrants who settled in Britain between 1960 and 1980 and comment on their experiences of migration and identity. Wajid is the director of the Tape Letters project and is going to tell you a lot more about it than that, and also lead us through the deep listening videos this evening. So over to you.
Okay, hello everybody. First of all, can you just confirm that you can hear me okay? Zosia, okay, there we go. You're the only person I can see at the moment because everyone's videos are off at the moment. Okay, great. And just sort of confirm that you can see the screen that I'm about to share, which is, here we go. Can you see that? Yeah, okay, great. So I'm just going to sort of keep it in this view. I mean, it's obviously sort of nicer to have that view, but I find it really difficult to actually talk through this thing. So if you don't mind, I'll sort of stick to this view. If that's sort of perfectly legible, then that's really useful for me. Let me just slide a few things around and just make it a little bit easier for me to see. Okay, so so this is the project, and just a quick sort of overview, as Zosia sort of mentioned, just give you a little bit of a background to the kind of work that I do, some context to the project itself, and then introduce the deep listening videos. We're then going to have a break and then sort of get into a bit of a Q&A session. I think we've got about an hour and a bit or so, and we'll try and stick to timekeeping as much as we can. But there may be some sort of sliding about. This is me 20 odd years ago. I was sort of essentially was a music producer. That's my background, and sort of released various albums, toured around the world, performing in very sort of strange circumstances, strange music for strange people. I was fortunate enough to be signed by a record label called Mute, which gave me enough money to sort of make my own studio, and just produce music in a way that I liked. So this is my closest musical collaborator and bestie, Alice Kemp, and she's been involved in both this project Second Gen and Uniform, and sort of various albums that have been released in collaboration with her. I'm the sort of part of the great unwashed and the great uneducated. I left school with 3 O-levels, but because of the kind of work I was doing, I leapt into a master's, and part of my master's was an article I wrote on piano destruction. So then I was kind of referenced in the one of the German national newspapers as a world-renowned piano destruction expert. So it's a bit slightly odd accolade to have, but this gives you an idea about Modus Arts. I shifted from music production into sonic arts as a discipline, and it was the MA that really sort of lit that internal fire. This is a multidisciplinary piece that was installed at the Arnolfini and at the ICA here in London, and multiple sort of disciplines involved. This is some Japanese rope bondage, sort of got into that, and it's quite an interesting collaboration with James Shear, who worked with Kanduko a lot, who are a mixed able-bodied and disabled-bodied dance company, and so when we experimented with sort of physically tying somebody up, and particularly around body image with him, who you can maybe see in this picture where 2 of his legs are missing, so it really pushed at the edge of kind of what it means to be a dancer, And various sort of collaborations, experimental instruments. I used an array of ostrich feathers to make this strange instrument here. Lots of music for contemporary dances, a collaboration with the Scottish choreographer Gail Snedden, where we sort of created a dance film on the back of an idea that I had when I was a little boy, where I wanted to transplant the inner ear of a dog into my own. And the conclusion was kind of pretty unsettling in the film itself. A sound installation sort of under the River Thames, deep listening workshops for children, which kind of relates to what we're going to be doing later on today. So And this is kind of this is one of my studios, and well, it's a shared studio, and it gives you an idea that this isn't a kind of a recording studio. This is kind of more of a fine art space. So it gives you a bit of an idea that I'm not an oral historian or an archivist. I'm a sound artist, right? And that does relate obviously to the project itself. This project, it came about really through this guy here. This is my father, and he passed away about 28 years ago. And he was really into singing a devotional hymn called the Naat. And people would come to our homes, to our home in Manchester, and listen to him sing. He would be invited to other people's homes to sing his Naats. We'd be invited to mosques, wherever. And it got to the point where people were asking him to record these Naats on cassette tapes so that they could listen to them in their own homes, right? About 5 years ago, I was looking for one of these tapes at my mum's place in Manchester. I'm a Mancunian originally, but I moved to London when I was 18, so I've been here for about 30 odd years now. But I came up to Manchester looking to find one of these things, and this is what I found instead. Not instead, alongside, right? And that says, from right to left, that says "Dudi se grelon bate," and that's written in Urdu, and that translates as saying the chatterings of Dudi village, and that says "Ami Jan ki bate," and that's like chattering. This is the talks of mum's talks, and I knew these weren't Naat tapes. These were something else, and in fact, I immediately remembered me being pulled in by my mum and dad to sort of say hello to some auntie or uncle in Pakistan, and it's typically awkward. You can imagine kind of what it's like for a little kid to sort of say hi. You know, you're kind of shy and nervous anyway, but also you're meant to send these messages to these faceless people who are your family and who you're meant to sort of love and care for, right? So. But I immediately remembered that feeling for me, right? What I realized was that this wasn't an arts project. What I had in my hand wasn't an arts project. In fact, this is what it was. It was a heritage project. And the National Lottery, the Heritage Fund, the HLF they were called at the time, they've since rebranded, they really came about and supported this, and we sort of shaped the project along the lines of a sort of a proper oral history project. So it was an interesting challenge for us as sound artists to really understand that discipline really well and try and do well by it. Right? We've since worked on a nationwide project, and the Heritage Fund supported it again. This time around, the Arts Council got involved, and very recently the Audio Content Fund have given us some money to be able to develop some radio shows, which I'll sort of mention as well. The core aims for the project itself were to create the archive of cassette tapes, because I knew that if my mum had these things, other people would have them too. That we wanted to create intergenerational discourse around memory, around heritage, and all the kind of themes that we thought we'd find. We wanted to contextualize and frame the cassette tape as a parallel mode of comms, right, alongside letter writing and the occasional phone calls. We wanted to make obviously, I'm aware as artists, we're comfortable and familiar with creating, fancy exhibitions. But what I wanted to make sure was that we didn't do what I think is not typical, but sometimes happens, where a particular community is used to draw out sort of primary information, and then that information is just relayed to special interest groups, right? So it's kind of oral historians or archivists, or it's up on a website where the actual original community themselves don't access this stuff. So it was very important for me to sort of make sure that the contributing community were considered a vital and important part of our outreach. And that to do that, we would have to use the language they're using, and that's Potwari. And Potwari has a particular issue with it in the fact that it's only spoken. This thing has no written form to it, so you have to use another language to try and actually get close to the phonics of it. And I'll talk a little bit about how we managed to get around that. So we have the archive that exists now, and that's at the Bishopsgate. And all the cassettes we've sourced so far. They're in a temperature-controlled vault, and it's amazing to sort of see these tapes now as being valuable artifacts. We've sourced so far around 43 cassettes, and we've undertaken over 100 interviews. We hold a whole lot of outputs, you know, a website, a booklet, exhibitions. Close to 21,000 people checked it out when exhibition spaces were open. And we since have some plans for some online exhibitions, which I won't tell you about just yet because we're keeping that under wraps. I was going to show this, but Zosia was actually, let's stick to the deep listening stuff. And I'm like, all right, fine. So I'm going to keep tight-lipped about this, but obviously follow us on social media to find out what we've got planned, right? We built in trust within the British Pakistani community about our motives, right? And I'll explain why that was particularly important and relevant to one of the examples I'll show later on. And also we set up relationships with translation and transcription teams in Pakistan. Again, it's something I'll sort of talk about why that was really crucial for us to uncover all this stuff. So, what did we find? This is my mum, and she came to the UK about 6 or 7 years after my dad did. So it seems to be quite typical in families where the men would arrive in the UK but for a good number of years before their partners would do. And so she was left in Pakistan, and she was horribly mistreated by her in-laws, really maltreated. And when she came over to the UK, they continued with that mistreatment of her, right? And they and so they'd send her, you know, letters, you know, which she couldn't read. She couldn't read. One of the sort of issues, and one of the reasons as to why people like her would send these cassette tapes is that as a girl, she wasn't allowed access to school at primary level, right, at all, only because she was a girl. And her brothers were entirely allowed to do this. So she has a sort of burning sense of injustice about that to this day, right? But she wasn't able to read or write these letters. So her in-laws would send her these letters. They would be relayed to her. And it got to a point where she just went, I'm done. I'm sick of this. I'm in my own home. I'm in my own protective space. I've snapped. I'm going to respond to this. And so she responded by a really sort of, you know, quite a visceral letter, tape letter, a cassette tape. She gave it to a relative of ours in the family who she knew was going over to Pakistan. He found out what was on it and brought it back, right? And she gave him a bollocking about that. She was absolutely furious about it. And so she sent it in the post to make sure they got it. So some interesting sort of behaviours and reasons as to why people, you know, recorded these things. These guys, Asim and Asma, they're based in Bradford. Asim is Bradford based. She was based in Badana in Gujarat in Pakistan. They sent tapes to each other every 2 or 3 weeks for about 3 years because they actually fell in love over the tapes. And part of the reason why they used these tapes is just because they had no privacy. They had phones in their homes, but no way of actually talking to each other in privacy. And they fell in love over that whole time throughout these tapes. And they've given us 3 tapes each. And you can kind of imagine what's on this stuff, right? I mean, really, like, it's young love stuff, you know. It's really desperate teenage stuff, right? Lots of sort of, you know, lots of tears, lots of heartbreak, and lots of really sexually explicit material, right? And so we had to be, so, you know, when I mentioned, you know, we had to sort of build trust, this couldn't be more of an example of the kind of trust we needed to have within this project about people. And they still gave us 3 tapes each, you know, because they knew we were going to handle this very, very carefully, right? Cassette tapes developed for multiple listening, right? Obviously they were in music media, but Sarwar here, she could only listen to these once or twice because listening to her mum crying was just unbearable, right? So these sorts of interesting themes started sort of appearing as we started analysing all this stuff. This guy here, Mohammed Zareen, I'm going to play you one of the pieces in one of the interviews that we did with him, and he would listen to the tapes, but only respond to them in letter form. He would write in Urdu because he wanted to demonstrate he was educated, right? So yeah, so it was an interesting reason as to why he'd how we'd behave around these tapes. And you can see this is this is the device that he used to sort of to listen to these tapes and record on them. And these photographs here that are accompanying them are pretty interesting because there was lots of these photographic studios that set up to deal or to cater for the Commonwealth migrants, right, around the Second World War in the 50s, 60s. So these smart-looking guys here, these really sharp suits, that's very typical. They sort of send these photographs home and say, look how well we're doing in the motherland, right? Because remember, these are all places, certainly the South Asian, Indian continent, where Britain had a presence there. There's a colonial power, and they were there for a long time. And you can even see in the middle of this photograph here, this is Zareen in the middle, and he's wearing jeans and a jacket. And either side of that, these guys are wearing salwar kameez, these like traditional Asian clothes. And it's really inappropriate for northern England, you know what I mean? Really too cold, right, to wear thin salwar kameezes. But you can see some sense that these guys are getting comfortable in their own skin, right? Qamar here, there's a slightly sort of tragic story in that she was pregnant with her first child, again in Bradford, and her mother had contracted leukemia and sent her a cassette tape and just asked her to come over and pay her a visit in Pakistan. She waited until her first child was born, and then I think a few months later sort of went over there, and her mother sadly died as she actually arrived around that time. And she's been looking for that cassette and to this day hasn't found it. These monkeys are my two brothers and my sister, and this is the kind of intergenerational thing, right, that I was mentioning, in that this whole Tape Letters project is a kind of sonographic snapshot of the time. It captures the experiences of a migrant community, and even sort of interesting things like this, where kids like us who were born in Manchester are asked to sing the Pakistani national anthem. We have no idea of why. I mean, we understand that all national anthems are militaristic and they all sort of have a jingoist sort of feel to them, right? But we had no understanding of the trauma, that was partition of India. No idea about that, and no understanding that Pakistan was made through all that extraordinary sort of bloodshed that happened at that time, and why it was really significant for people like our parents, right? We just remember sort of reciting this thing. We remember the melodies of the actual national anthem. Don't really know what the words meant, actually, So yeah, an interesting idea about the beginnings of the British Pakistani identity. Like people like, so people like Qamar and like my mum, these guys are Pakistanis, right? But these guys are not. I'm not, right? I'm a British Pakistani, and this is the beginnings of the British Pakistani identity, right? Again, sort of I mentioned, things about literacy, and Zarina, this is my mum's sister who went to Canada. So these two sisters had these really divergent migratory routes. One came to the UK, one went to Canada. Their kids are North American and Brits, right? They have different accents, and their kids speak French as a second language, and my boys speak Swedish as a second language, and my partner's Swedish. So it's not something that these guys could have ever predicted, right? But they kept in touch with each other through these cassettes because they were desperate to share information like we all are. But for them, the cassettes were an absolute lifeline, just simply because they weren't given any access to education whatsoever. We also uncovered some really interesting migration stories. Of course, migration isn't A to B or A to Z or whatever. It isn't a simple line, right? We interviewed some people that were Indian ethnicity, born in Kenya, and then they were expelled, and then went back to India, and then moved to Pakistan, and then moved to Manchester. So really sort of interesting, multiple levels of discrimination and just difficulties like of dealing with multiple facets that come with migration. And this image here This is an image I took in Kashmir. This is sort of the Pakistani administered side of Kashmir. And it turns out that a few generations away, my own family came from the Indian side of Kashmir and then moved from the sort of Indian side of this area into Gujar Khan here and then came to the UK. And so there's all sorts of interesting things about migration not being just a simple thing, you know. This is a really interesting example of what we've uncovered fairly recently. Karamat Iqbal, he's Birmingham-based. He's a doctor now. He got his PhD in, I think, some line of education, and he came to the UK when he was 12 with his younger sister and his dad. His dad went back to Pakistan, and essentially, it wasn't. I don't think it was a case of just cold abandonment, but they were brought up by their uncle, I think. And the only way that Karamat could stay in touch with his dad was these cassette tapes. They were sent to his dad, sent by his dad to Karamat in Birmingham. And they were instructions on how to grow up. You know, it was kind of long, remote parenting, really. And so really what he could do is every time that his dad got on his nerves, he could just bloody turn the thing off, which I think is kind of, you know, like every child's dream, right? Just remote control your parents. So he could do that, right? But his father was deeply encoded in these cassette tapes, right? They were his father, you know, and you know, he in a strange way has a kind of slightly remote feeling to his dad, and quite an unusual feeling about the cassettes themselves. There's a certain kind of when I speak to him about this stuff, he kind of resents it. He kind of resents the tapes. You can see it, right? And but there's a line he came up with in one of the interviews. He says, you know, as a child, you may remember the imaginary friend, but my imaginary friend was my father, right? And that's a devastating line. You know, it's a killer situation. We have some extraordinary stories around partition, although that wasn't our intention. It really wasn't about looking into the complexities of partition. But we do know that, you know, sort of historians sort of say that something like about 800,000 to 1.4 million people have died sort of during this time in 1947. And this is the house where my mom grew up, behind this gate here. And remember where I mentioned Dudi se Grenobate? This is Dudi, this is the village, and it's a cluster of about 9 houses, right? So this is where the tapes would get sent back. My mum knows nothing about partition. She doesn't really understand the British presence, or she doesn't understand, you know, the Radcliffe Line or the East India Tea Company or what, all of that. No idea about it, right? But she does remember the smell of when other villages were burning around here. And that's a really interesting thing to really try and manage, about kind of how you deal with individual testimonies and the power of oral histories versus kind of established, you know, textbook histories. So this is all really new as a new discipline for me, you know, trying to understand. I mean, the idea that you're smelling this this atrocity is like it's a far more potent image, you know, than just reading about how Radcliffe calculated the line, you know. All sorts of other interesting things that's come out of it. We now have some linguistics experts, you know, linguists who are sort of looking into this thing. I was told that we speak Patwari, and actually it isn't Patwari. We speak. I was told we speak a dialect of Punjabi, but we don't. We speak Patwari, and Patwari, according to social linguists, is a language. Right? I don't quite understand where the definitions are of a language and a dialect, but it turns out that Patwari is technically it sits between Punjabi and Hindko, and it's known as a transitional language. So that's kind of really quite interesting because it has no written form, right? So we had some, you know, issues in trying to deal with that, and this is how we did it. We basically had a time code on the left hand side. This is an interview that I did with Mohammed Zareen, and we sort of transcribed this in this kind of way. So we had a column for who the interviewers were, and that says from right to left, that says Beli Jize Dosana Nagebe, and he responds saying Marana Mohammed Zareen. And here's a transliteration in English to give you sort of a bit of an idea of what we've done. So Pehli cheez hai to sona na geve Marana Muhammad Zareen. And we've done exactly the same using Urdu as we've done here with English. This doesn't make sense in English in the way that doesn't really make sense in Urdu. But by reading that out, you can get close to the sort of phonic version of it, right? And so that was a ton of work. I mean, it's a huge amount of work, right? Which is why the translation teams in Pakistan were so crucial, and it allowed us to do this. We created the archive. There's some brilliant outputs. Zosia, you're going to recognize some of these images from the PHM. You know, when the big engine room was kind of open to do stuff. And we were able to also do something like this, which was to do private events for the people that contributed. You know how I mentioned it was really important for us to make sure that we do these exhibitions that are absolutely reflected back to the community, right? And we know for sure that people like this have never set foot inside an exhibition space because their voices and their language, it just isn't reflected back to them. Even if this was done in Urdu, there would have been a disconnect, right? But we made an effort. And looking at this picture, one of the interesting things that really came out about it is that we understand marginalization. It's an easy thing to sort of try and get your head around. I suppose this is a simplistic way of looking at it. But you imagine people like this are the marginalized, right? What we consider to be marginalized group. But actually, what I started seeing was that people like Zara, who's my niece, they are marginalized from heritage. They're marginalized from oral histories in this way. So they have no idea of the discipline. They have no idea what it uncovers, right? So and they certainly don't know anything about all this complexity about the messaging system. Obviously, you know, we understand tape letters to be the same as a WhatsApp thing, right? Like a WhatsApp voice note, but they had no idea about the kind of long tail that is connected to it. I think so. Now's the time to sort of present the videos, and I was about to leap into a 10-minute break at this point. Zosia, do you think that's a good idea now, or do you think what's your feeling about how we should carry on?
So the deep listening videos are about half an hour, so I guess it's yeah, and we can head straight into them if you would like to. If anyone has a preference to grab a quick drink or nip to the loo before we do the half an hour of the videos, do shout now, and we can have a 5-10 minute break beforehand. If not, yeah, we can just head straight into them if everybody's happy.
Yeah. Shall we sort of just sort of see what, if you just let me know the general sort of heads up.
Well, no one's written in the chat they'd like to head on a 5-10 minute break. So speak now or kind of forever hold your peace. So yeah, I think we're good to go into them. We'll have a quick 5-minute break after.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay, so given that we're sort of sound people and sort of interested in the power of sound and the impact of sound, we didn't want to just go, okay, here's an interview, here's a snippet of the cassette. We wanted to do something interesting with this, right? And try and align ourselves with the emotional resonance of getting these cassettes in the first place. And given that the cassettes themselves are inherently oral, we wanted to sort of sit alongside that too. So we have we created a sound installation, and what we'll be presenting now is our response to that sound installation too. So there's multiple steps in our response to this thing. I mentioned we wanted to sort of align with the oral inherent in the medium itself. We wanted to replicate dark room sound installations, and this is where I've created lots of multi-speaker sound installations, so like a sound cube, for example, a 3D sound cube, and you have a kind of a lit space for an audience to walk into that's in the center of the cube, so a bit like the Air Cinema piece that I mentioned before. But if you imagine the kind of all of the visual elements entirely removed, so that includes lighting, right? So it's just a black space. And what that does is that it forces you to listen, and it's a deeper listening experience. So we've tried to make some videos that drawing some of the ideas from that, right? And we also wanted to counter visual hegemony. Yes, up for sound, because we are visually, bombarded, right? Obviously, this project and what I've shown you is is visually quite rich, but we want to just counter that a little bit and make the case that sound as a medium doesn't need to be accompanied by anything else. So there's a bit of a trend for creating these videograms, right? So you basically have audio, and it'll still have a waveform demonstrating that it's an audio piece, right? It's still looking at the bloody thing, right? So what you'll see is, hopefully not much, and we'll get to that. What I want to do is to give you a bit of an insight in terms of how we've gone about spatializing this stuff, right? So we took the circle of speakers idea, and if you imagine this is a plan view here, so the audience is sort of stood in the middle, you have 8 speakers in a circle, and we had sort of various diffused pieces of audio sort of going on. Diffused meaning that it's sort of moving from one audio point to another. We wanted to sort of replicate that in some way, the same kind of spatialization approach. So what we've done is considered the kind of oral headspace as the central point, and then sort of 8 locations around the headspace, right? And we've used all sorts of really interesting tech, to give us an idea about how to do that. So you have some spatial panners here and some really nice, imaging, which gives us some pretty good idea about where we are in the stereo field. So this is going to be the first of 3 videos. And if you do have headphones, I'd recommend them. I recommend you sort of you put them on now. I want to. What I'll be doing is I'll stop sharing my screen, my PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to go into Vimeo. But what I want to do is I want to have a little chat about this particular piece. Now remember, Mohammed Zareen was the guy who didn't like to respond in cassettes. He didn't like to respond by recording cassette. He'd basically get his kids to do it, or he would write in letters, right? So there we go. This is this particular piece. I brought them back. I undertook an interview with him. He's based in Ashton-under-Lyne, which is in Greater Manchester, and the interview was in Patois. My Patois is pretty terrible. It's not. What do you have to?
Water.
Sure. I know.
Sorry.
That's okay, no worries. Cool. They're good. All right. My Patois is pretty terrible, actually. It's pretty broken. And in fact, when I go to Pakistan, they can recognise that I'm an Englishman, right? They can see, they can spot it, and so I did my best interviewing this guy. He's a Desi, he's a sort of native speaker, and what we did was we took the interview, and we sent it to our team in Pakistan and had it transliterated and then translated into English, and then I went back with this particular piece and got his son to recite this particular clip, right? And what we've done is I then went back and recorded my questions to him in English. And what this means is that you should all have access to this, whether you speak Patois or English or both. You should be able to understand this as a triangulation, right? And what I did was place, if you imagine that sort of circle, my voice in these 2 locations, Zareen's voice in Patois on these 3 areas on the listening point, and then his son's voice in English in the other 3. And there's a sort of a flow between these 3 spaces. Okay, so I'm going to stop screen share at this point, and I'm going to and then load up Vimeo. Okay, so that's there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share. Okay. Can you all see that? Okay, great. And I brought them back. Okay, great. And can you tell me if you're seeing? Oops. If you're seeing that sort of full screenish? Yeah. Great. I brought them back. This interview is on the Sunday, 20th of November, and the time is 12:22 p.m. And I'm interviewing in Ashton-under-Lyne in Lancashire in the UK. The first thing is, can you tell me your name?
मेरा नाम मोहम्मद ज़रीन.
My name's Mohammed Zareed.
And your birth date?
मेरी बर्थडे 12/10/46.
12th October 1946.
मैं 64 ਵਿੱਚ ਆਇਆ ਸਾਂ. ਤੇਰੇ ਡੈਡੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਮਾਮੂ ਸਨ. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ ਬੁਲਾਇਆ ਸੀ ਬਾਂਝਾ ਕਰਕੇ.
I came here in 1964. Your father was my maternal uncle. He sponsored me to live in the UK as his nephew.
ਇਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਫਿਰ 72 ਚ ਗਿਆ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ. ਫਿਰ ਸ਼ਾਦੀ ਮੈਂ ਕੀਤੀ. ਫਿਰ ਸ਼ਾਦੀ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਵਾਪਸ ਆ ਗਿਆ. ਫਿਰ ਮੇਰੇ ਤੇਰੇ ਅੱਬਾ ਜੀ ਗਏ. ਮੇਰੀ ਵਾਈਫ ਨੂੰ ਉਸਦਾ ਵੀਜ਼ਾ ਲਗਾ. ਤੇਰੇ ਅੱਬਾ ਜੀ ਨਾਲ ਮੇਰੀ ਬੀਵੀ ਆ ਗਈ.
Then I went to Pakistan in 72. I got married. Then I came back. Then your father went to Pakistan and my wife got her visa at the time.
ਮੇਰੀ ਬੱਚੀ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੋਈ. ਆਸੀਆ ਜ਼ਰੀਨ. ਉਹ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਹੀ ਬਾਅਦ ਵਿੱਚ ਫੌਤ ਹੋਈ. ਬਹਰਹਾਲ ਉਸਦਾ 6 ਮਹੀਨੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਈ.
One of my daughters was born in Pakistan, Asi Zareed. She then also died in Pakistan. However, she was 6 months old when she came here.
ਪਹਿਲ ਮੈਂ ਪ੍ਰੈਸਟਨ ਆਇਆ ਸੀ. ਬਾਈ ਟ੍ਰੇਨ ਆਇਆ ਸੀ ਲੰਡਨ ਦੀ ਥਰੋ. ਮਾਮੂ ਤੇਰੇ ਅੱਬਾ ਜੀ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਸੀ ਮੈਨੂੰ.
I came to Preston by train from London Heathrow. My uncle, your father, came to pick me up.
ਫਿਰ ਮੈਂ 1 ਸਾਲ ਬ੍ਰੈਡਫੋਰਡ ਰਿਹਾ.
Then I stayed in Bradford for 1 year.
ਫਿਰ ਮੈਂ ਓਲਡਮ ਆ ਗਿਆ. ਮਾਮੂ ਜੀ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਗਏ ਸੀ ਮੈਂ ਬ੍ਰੈਡਫੋਰਡ. ਮਾਮੂ ਵਾਪਸ ਆਏ. ਫਿਰ ਮੈਂ ਓਲਡਮ ਆ ਗਿਆ. ਓਲਡਮ ਤੋਂ ਫਿਰ ਮੈਂ ਆਸਟਨ ਆ ਗਿਆ.
Then I came to Oldham. When my uncle went to Pakistan, I was in Preston. Then I moved to Ashton from Oldham.
ਹੁਣ ਫਿਰ 1968 1969 ਆਸਟਨ ਹੀ 69 ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਸਟਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਿਹਾ.
I've been living in Ashton since 1968 or 1969.
When you used to record the tapes, what were the ways in which you recorded them?
ਤੇ ਟੇਪ ਰਿਕਾਰਡ ਤੇ ਬੰਦਾ ਰਿਕਾਰਡ ਪਲੇਅਰ ਹੋਣੀ ਸੀ. ਟੇਪ
Using the tape recorder, it was a tape player too.
Do you still have it?
ਮੇਰੇ ਕੋਲ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ. ਮੇਰੇ ਕੋਲ ਪੁਰਾਣੀ ਹੈ ਪਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਪੁਰਾਣੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ. ਉਹ ਟੇਪ ਨਹੀਂ ਚੱਲਣੀ. ਉਹ ਖਰਾਬ ਹੋਈ.
I still have one, but I used to have one older one. It doesn't work now.
And the tapes that you used to get from Pakistan, did you used to listen to them alone or together with a family?
ਇਕੱਠੇ ਸੁਣਨੇ ਹੋਣੇ ਸੀ. ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਸਲਾਮ ਦੁਆ ਹੋਣੀ ਸੀ ਉਸਨੇ. ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਸੁਣੀ ਨਾ ਸੀ. ਸਾਰੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਸੁਣਨੇ ਸੀ.
We used to listen to them together with the whole family. There were greetings for everyone, so we used to listen to the tapes together.
And when you used to record the reply, did you used to sort of record it and send it back?
चलो वापस भेजने से उसला जवाब देना से. टेप पर मैं खुद बजाते खुद मैं टेप करके नहीं भेजी. मेरे बच्चे टेप की थी.
We used to record a reply and send it back. I myself never sent a recorded tape. My children used to record them.
ਨਾ ਆਸੀਆ ਨੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਟੇਪ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ. ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਗਿਆ ਤੇ ਨਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਦਾਦੀ ਦਾਦੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਟੇਪ ਕਰਕੇ ਚਾਚੂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਆਪਣੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ. ਫਿਰ ਉੱਥੇ ਸੁਣੀਆਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ.
When I went to Pakistan, my daughter Asia recorded a tape for her grandparents and her uncle. They then listened to it and recorded a reply.
ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਕੀ ਸੁਣਾਈ. ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਮੈਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਇਆ. ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਸੁਣਿਆ.
I brought it here to the UK where we all listened to it. I recorded the conversation of our grandparents. I told them I am going back, so they should send a message to their son.
How did you used to reply if you yourself never recorded these messages?
ਖਤ ਲਿਖਣਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ.
I used to reply with letters only.
ਬਾਅਦ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿਲਸਿਲਾ ਟੈਲੀਫੋਨ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ. ਟੈਲੀਫੋਨ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਿਲਸਿਲਾ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੋਇਆ ਖਤ ਲਿਖਣੇ ਬੰਦ ਹੋ ਗਏ.
Later on, I started using the telephone and I stopped writing letters.
फिर टेलीफोन ते जिसला होया कार्ड लिया टेलीफोन ते कीता पाकिस्तान कीता या करूं दूसरा टेलीफोन यूज कीता टेलीफोन ते गल कर ली बस खैर खैरियत पता कर ली फिर खत को नहीं ली फिर खत बंद हो गया
Whenever we needed to talk to our family in Pakistan, we used to buy calling cards and call them from landline. Then we never wrote letters again. It was completely stopped.
Those tapes, where did you used to store them? Did you used to store them in the attic, for example?
नहीं मैं ए तक लिहाज कोई अटक नहीं सी रोज पईयां मैं हाले टेप हूं सुन ना सा सका लेकिन मैं रखियां जरूर सेव कीतियां ये मेरे को टेपां वो सारियां वो पईयां
Not in the attic. I used to place them in here in the drawer. The tapes I've given you, I could have listened to them. I don't have a tape player, but I still have all those tapes.
बाकी सब चल रहा उसे नहीं जिंदगी चल रही
Life goes on.
That's it.
So, yeah, I suppose one of the sort of interesting things about that was is actually the sort of class, the class indicators in this, right? Because we know that sort of Patwari is a sort of lower socioeconomic working class language. And you can hear Nazim, the guy who's sort of, is speaking, you can hear where he's from. You can see he's a northern working class guy. And it's sort of interesting, you've got these sort of parallels that are there. It's still there, it still sort of continues in this thing. And yeah, I hope that was a really interesting sort of insight, and hope that the specialization kind of worked, right? Let me now share with you the second piece. And this is, in fact, what I'll do is I'll go back to sharing the PowerPoint screen. And this is called Something Else Happened. And this is the story between the two sisters that I mentioned. This is my mum and my auntie in Canada. And what you'll be hearing is a clip from one of the cassettes that was sent by my sister, by my auntie, my mum's sister in Canada, to my mum in Manchester. And what happened is that she'd had a bad dream, and she envisaged something bad happening to my mum and my dad. And so she tried to call her from Canada, and she couldn't get through. There was operators at the time, right, that would put people together when it came to international calls. The operator was saying something that she just couldn't understand, and it was super expensive as well, So she felt compelled to record this cassette tape on the back of that kind of bad dream. And what we did, these are the two sisters here, and the way we realised this. If you imagine, again, these are the kind of specialized spaces. We relayed the cassette clip in all locations. Then what we've done is we've relayed, we've sort of replayed the cassette clip recited by her daughter. Right, her Canadian daughter, she's reciting this clip of her mum from, like 30, 40 years, 35 years ago. And it was all on the back of the fact that, remember, this is recorded in Patwari. And so it was sort of trying to get close to the translation in English as much as possible. I don't think we got it entirely right, but we're pretty close. And then we played around with the idea of actually fracturing these little sentences of that whole clip and recording completely random people. And so there's recordings of me, but there's recordings of my partner and my son and there's a famous poet called Lisan Akbar who's recorded some stuff, and just various people, and we just diffused this in different places, right? And we mixed and matched between Patwari and English. So this piece is the original cassette clip, translation in Canadian English, recited by her daughter, and then this multi spaced piece, right? And let me load this up in Vimeo again. Okay, and I'll full screen this thing again. Something else happened.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम अस्सलाम वालेकुम आपा भाईजान मैं ये ख्वाब ये देखी बहुत डाड़ी ख्वाब आनी और याद सारा दिन इतना देर परेशान रहा कोई हिसाब नहीं पता नहीं तुसां मैं बीमार देखा आप लीमा की भजन यासीन होंगे नहीं तुसां नहीं मैं कहनी ते एडी डाड़ी दिलाई तंगी मैं पता नहीं क्यों सा देखा दो भैन देखी बीमार भलियां भी तो खुद को दिल जाया ख्याल तो मरियम नाल भाई मैं मरियम मैं पता नहीं मैं क्यों सा ख्वाब देखी तानी आप तू एवं सोचनी रहनी खैर उसी तो कोई बारह खून छुनाने रहने नाले फिर नाले आप मैं तो मुझे नंबर लिया सी ना तो उस जो राइड जानी सी पता नहीं कोई लिखाई जी खराबी हुई है कि जो है फोन मिलाया तो कोई नहीं ऑपरेटर को की दसिया पाया तो पता नहीं कभी लगी है कोई दाद तो भाई फलाना और घर टेलीफोन किया सी वैसे ही कहने चलो घर खैर खरीद जरखान किया अपने तो कोठी दसने सुन खैर मेरा आपदा नाल भी गल हुई नहीं शायदा नाल भी ज़्यादा नाल गल हुई तो कहनी अज सलीमा भी आई सी ग्रां तो वो कहनी मैं अज आई बिल्कुल खैर खरीद करने रखने हालात जरीना में बहुत मासूम हो गई मेरा अच्छा बस कुछ करना बार बार फिर अंधेरे च इधर ती अंदर सुकून जाइया फिर भी नहीं रहना होया था फोन की सी ना तुसां दा दो चार गल्लां कीतियां सुन मैं कोई फोन नहीं बिल पैड़े ने बद्दी किसने ते गल्लां जेहड़ियां नो दिलां च टियां रहनियां पेट भरे गल्लां नाल पर अल्लाह ताला पता नहीं कदू करा साढ़े दिलां ने कराते मुल्कां ने ताले लै समझे तुसां पुराने मुल्कां तो मुश्किल ही इसने
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, sister and brother. I had a bad dream and I was upset the whole day recalling it. I don't know why, but I dreamt that you were ill, Sister Halima and Brother Yasin. I'm talking about the two of you. I had such heartache over it, seeing you ill like that. So I told Maryam, and I told her I didn't know why I had such a bad dream. And she told me that I'm always thinking too much and that it will be fine. They'd call us and speak to us if there was anything wrong, she said. Also, sister, the phone number I took from you wasn't right. Either I took it down wrong or something else happened. But when I dialed the number, the operator spoke and was saying something I didn't understand. I called Brother Zafran's family home on the phone. He just wanted to ask if everything was okay. He said he's fine. I also spoke with Abda, Shaida, and Zaida, and also Salima. She was there too. And she was telling me that everything is good in her village. So I felt better, but again, I wasn't feeling better, so I dialed your number and talked to you, but just for a while because telephone calls are so expensive. The things I want to tell you from the heart have to stay in the heart. I couldn't tell you everything, and I have a lot of things to talk about. I don't know when I would meet you, and God knows when these locks in the heart will be broken. It seems impossible.
भाईजान मैं ख्वाब एक वेखी बहुत डाड़ी
And I was upset the whole day recalling it.
मेरा दिल सारा दिन परेशान रहना कोई हिसाब नहीं
I had such heartache over it, seeing you ill like that.
आपा लीमा की भाईजान यासीन होरां की तुसां की भी कहनियां पी.
So I told Maryam, and I told her I didn't know why I had such a bad dream.
आखनी है आपा तू एवें सोचनी लेनी है खैर होसी.
They'd call us and speak to us if there was anything wrong, she said.
नाले आपा तुसां कोलों जड़ा नंबर लिया सी ਉਹ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੋਈ ਲਿਖਾਈ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਰਾਬੀ ਹੋਈ ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਰ
But when I dialed the number, the operator spoke and was saying something I didn't understand.
ਬਈ ਸੈਫਰਾਨ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕਿਹਾ ਨਾ ਕਾਲ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਕੱਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਕਹਿਣੇ ਸਨ ਕਿ ਸਾਰੇ ਹੈਵੀਅਤ ਹੈ ਨਾ
He just wanted to ask if everything was okay.
ਵੈਸੇ ਕਹਿਣੇ ਕਾਰ ਖੈਰ ਫੀ ਸੀ ਕੋਈ ਹਾਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਕੋਠੀ ਦੱਸਣੇ ਸਨ ਖੈਰ ਮੈਰ ਹੈ
ਆਬਦਾ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਈ ਸ਼ਾਇਦਾ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਜ਼ੈਦਾ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਸਲੀਮਾ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਸਲੀਮਾ ਆਈ ਸੀ ਗਰਾਂ ਤੋਂ
And she was telling me that everything is good in her village.
So I felt better, but something wasn't settled, so I dialed your number and talked to you.
But just for a while, because telephone calls are so expensive.
ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਦਿਲ ਤੇ ਦਿਮਾਗ ਤੇ ਪੇਟ ਭਰੇ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਨਾਲ
ਅੱਲਾਹ ਤਾਲਾ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਦੋਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਦਿਲਾਂ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਮੁਲਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਤਾਲੇ ਖੋਲ ਸੀ
ਜੇ ਤੁਸਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਹੋ ਸੀ
It seems impossible.
Thank you for the reminder to unmute myself there. So many sort of interesting points to that original clip. You know, you sort of you hear somebody who's accidentally recorded something over the original message, and I think that was it was interesting when you capture these moments because I have no idea who these people were. I still haven't actually been able to figure out who that extra little clip was in that recording. You can hear it's a very different ambience, right? So it's a different kind of room shape, and it's definitely indoors, but it's a different kind of echo. So yeah, I've yet to find out kind of who that little interjection was, you know. But there's so many sort of interesting revelations about that little clip, and certainly the approach that we took in terms of trying to realise it as a creative response to it, especially how we've essentially revealing that a very, very private message. This is a message that was only meant for my mum. This was a message between two sisters. Nobody else should have access to this thing, but now we've sort of placed ourselves in the middle of this private message, and we've made it accessible, you know. And obviously there's all sorts of interesting sort of lines of ethical lines about what that really means to revisit it, and it's certainly really difficult to try and get close to the rhythm of the language when it's actually written out in Urdu, right? Trying to get them to recite the patois in that was really difficult, so it took a lot of stops and starts, you know, to sort of try and get it right. Okay, and so this is the final deep listening video that I'll be presenting today, and it's called "Let Me Listen." And this we will now be listening to. Do you remember the cassettes that I mentioned that we got from Asim and Asma, the two lovers, sort of Bradford based? They are now both based in Bradford, and they have 2 kids. And I sort of mentioned how you know, their particular story was so incredibly desperate young love. You know, they don't feel the same way. I mean, they're still really into each other and still love each other. But I mean, I think it just happens with, you know, you just get old. You've been together for somebody for a long time. Things are not the same. It morphs into another kind of love. But what we managed to do is pretty much the same thing as we did previously, but this time around we panned these messages to each other, hard left and hard right in the spatial sort of in the sphere, right? And what it means is that you're going to hear Asim's voice, his cassette message on the left, and you're going to hear Asim's on the right. Asim's on the left, Asim's on the right. You will essentially be standing in the middle of these things, so you can use your mind to shift between these two. What we did was we took that clip for about a minute and a half of them on the cassettes and got them to recite this stuff in English, 25 years later. And it was really difficult. One thing, they are not actors, right? And secondly, they don't feel the same way, right? So it's really difficult to try and get the same kind of emotional resonance, right, as the desperation in their messages. But this is what we did for the specialization. We've got Asman on one side, Asman on the other, and then this is in the messages are in Urdu, I think, on this particular cassette, these particular sets of cassettes, and then in English on the opposing set, right? So let me load this up on Vimeo. And share this with you. Okay, and let's full screen this.
I brought them back.
Oops, my apologies.
Let me listen.
मेरा दिल, मेरा जिगर, मेरी जान, मेरा रूह, मेरी मोहब्बत, मेरा आशियाँ, मेरी खुशी, मेरी जिंदगी, मेरी पहली और आखिरी ख्वाहिश आसमान जी। अस्सलाम वालेकुम। वालेकुम सलाम। आपका क्या हाल है? अच्छा, तो बात आज है कि आज दिन है इतवार और तारीख है पहली 1 सितंबर 1996 और वक्त हुआ है 1:05 दिन के। तो पहली बात यह है कि जान, मैं तुमसे माफ़ी मांगता हूँ क्योंकि तुम्हारी कैसेट मुझे बहुत लेट मिली। तुमने 15 तारीख को पोस्ट की कैसेट और मुझे 29 तारीख को कैसेट तुम्हारी मिली। 29 तारीख को तुम्हारी कैसेट मिली क्योंकि यहाँ पर पोस्ट स्ट्राइक थी, उन्होंने स्ट्राइक कर दी थी, इसलिए 2 हफ्ते तुम्हारी कैसेट मुझे लेट मिली और मैं तुम्हारी कैसेट की वजह से बहुत परेशान था जान, बहुत परेशान था। मैंने उनसे पूछा कहाँ है कैसेट, बताओ मुझे। जुम्मे को सुबह डैड की फोन आई थी, उन्होंने आतिफ के बारे में बताया कि वो नहीं आ जाएगा। इतने आंसू आए कि उन्होंने क्या है कि उन्हें खिदाश रहा कि आसम क्या मुझे ये महसूस हुआ क्योंकि उसकी कैसेट लेट मिली है। तो आपकी कैसेट नहीं आई बल्कि मेरी जान आ जा गई है। उसकी थोड़ी लेट मिली 7-8 तारीख तक उसकी मिली जान आ गई है। उसका है फिक्र ना करसी। ओके जान, ये बात पहले मैं क्लियर कर दूं क्योंकि ना मैं फिक्र करूं। ओके, इट इज ना मेरी गलती है ना तेरी गलती। ओके, किस्मत दिन था बल्कि अच्छा तो सुना जान, तू अपनी कैसी है? ठीक ठाक है? आसम वैसे कैसा लगती है जान? उसमें दावा पानी ऐसे पाकिस्तान आता रहेगा। काश मेरा भी ये साफ होना चाहिए। और ऐसे कितने 3 तक 2 साल तक मिलने रहेगा। काश मेरा ये वालों ना पानी मेरी सीट मिल गई तो मैं आ रहा हूँ वापस। एनीवे, क्या हाल है? जब तक तुम कैसे कॉल इंशाल्लाह पहुंच गया उसी यही ध्यान में आ रहा था कि शायद आसमां में कि वो इंतजार करती रही। दादी मुझे भूल गए होंगे। अम्मी ना सदरा साहब मुझे ये उम्मीद नहीं थी। बहुत सलाम और प्यार दी। ओके, और दादी भी कह रही थी कि आसिम से कहना कि उसकी कैसेट मिलने से एक दिन पहले वो मुझे कह रही थी कि आसिम तुम्हें भूल गया है, वो तुम्हें कभी याद नहीं रखेगा। उसने कैसेट भी नहीं भेजी, ना अपनी खैरियत के बारे में कुछ बताया। लेकिन मैंने उन्हें कहा कि आप यकीन करें मेरी जान मुझे कैसेट भेजेगी। सॉरी, मुझे माफ कर दो जान, मैं हर कैसेट में तुम्हें पहले हाथ ही डांस देता हूँ। I'm sorry, okay? आदि तकरीबन कैसेट के जाके तो फिर मैं तुम्हें डांटा करूँगा, ठीक है? अच्छा, तो इस डांस के लिए मैं बहुत माफी चाहता हूँ और उम्मीद करता हूँ तुमने मुझे माफ कर दिया है, ठीक है? और तुम्हारा दिमाग को ठंडा करने के लिए मैं तुम्हें एक गाना रिकॉर्ड कर रहा हूँ। ओके, पहले हाथ ही रिकॉर्ड कर रहा हूँ क्योंकि बाद में जो है ना बात करूँगा, ठीक है? ओके, मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ तुम्हें गाना पसंद आएगा और तुम माइंड नहीं करोगी। ओके, तो लो तुम्हारा सालों की आवाज़ है, उम्मीद करता हूँ तुम्हें पसंद आएगा। ओके,
My heart, my liver, my soul, my love, my life, my body, my first and last wish, my dear Asma, assalamu alaikum. My dear Asim.
Today is Sunday.
Assalamu
And the
alaikum.
date is the 1st of September
How are you?
1996.
I hope
and it's 1:05 in
you
the
are doing
afternoon.
well. I got your
First thing, my
cassette
baby,
and
is
I
I
had
apologise
tears
to you.
in my
I got your
eyes
cassette
when
very,
I
very
got
late.
it.
You posted it on the
I bet
15th and I received it on
you
the
can
29th
hear
because of
it
the
in my
postal
voice
strike.
that I'm not doing
That's the
well.
reason why I got it late.
I am okay
I
physically,
was so
but
worried.
inside I'm burning.
You know how I am with you.
I went out and
just
when I
too
came
much.
home, Sidra said,
I was
your
really worried, but
cassette
Dad called
is
me on
here.
Friday and he told me that
I
Atif
was
will not come from
crazy
Pakistan
with
today.
happiness.
Instead, he's coming next
I
week.
asked her, where is the cassette? Tell me right
So
now.
obviously,
And when I saw it, I can't tell you, I had so
don't
many
consider this mine or
tears
your
in
fault.
my eyes.
It's the fault of the
It
post.
wasn't a
That's
cassette
why,
that had
you know,
arrived, but
you got
it
the cassette
was my
late.
soul.
Uh,
My
so
soul
how are you
came
anyway?
alive.
And
That
how
day
lucky is my
was
brother?
very lucky day for
Gets to
me.
stay with you in Pakistan for another week.
It's always a lucky day
I
for
wish the
me
same would
when
happen
you
with
send
me.
me a cassette.
But
You better keep
it
sending
looks
me
like Atif
more
will
of them,
return to UK
or
around
else
about the same time you'll get my cassette.
I'll be very angry with you. Everyone
Besides
was
that, how's your
asking
dad?
me,
How's my dad?
has Asim's cassette
How's
arrived?
grandma,
I replied,
grandfather,
no,
mum,
not yet.
your
It
mum,
was hurting me
Sidra,
inside,
Sakab? Give
and
salam to everybody.
it felt like
And just
I
tell them
would
know that
do
I'm okay
is
and
keep on waiting for you,
not to worry about
and
anything.
that maybe you had
But how are
forgotten
you
about
anyway?
me.
I really, really
On
miss you.
one day before
I miss
your
you a
cassette
lot.
arrived,
I'm just waiting for Dad to
grandmother
come
was
back and talk
saying,
to me.
ask Asim if
I
he
might even
has
come there for a week.
forgotten you, and that he would
But
not remember
let me
you.
listen to some of your
He
talk
didn't
and
even send you the cassette,
so I can
and
get
he
some into my
didn't
head and
even
I'll
let
speak
you
to you shortly.
know about how is he doing.
Okay, my baby, I'm
But
back.
I said to her, believe me, my
I was
sweetheart will
listening back to the
definitely
cassette.
send me
I'm
a
always seem to
cassette.
tell you off about something
Tell
in the
me,
first
what
half,
should I do? I
which I'm
can't
really, really sorry
control my
about, and I
tears.
apologise. It won't happen
Are you
again.
laughing or
I
crying
hope you'll forgive me.
when you are
You have forgiven
listening
me,
to
all
my
right?
voice? I might
Anyway, to cool you down a
cry
little bit,
all
I'm
the
going to
way
record you one of my
on
favourite
this
songs.
cassette, but please don't worry, okay?
It's in the first
Please,
half. I'm recording it so I can
let
talk to
me
you
cry as
majority
much
of the second
as I
half.
want. I don't have
And hope you like
anything
the song,
except these
and
tears.
hope you won't mind.
Give me 2
Here you
minutes,
go. It's the voice
please.
of
I'll
Kumar
talk to
Sanu, and I
you
hope you
after
will
I
like it.
stop crying.
Okay.
Yeah. So the sort of interesting thing about that is we know that sort of they sent cassettes to each other for about 3 years or so, and there's a particular reason why Asma was really upset in this instance, in that kind of series, in that period, and it's because Asim actually she didn't receive one of Asim's cassettes for about 3 or 4 weeks or so. And what happened during that time is that Asma had been told by her grandmother that Asim he'd basically had a girlfriend here in the UK, and Asma was heartbroken about it. She was completely distraught and really didn't know kind of how to make sense of all this stuff. And then Asim's response is actually saying, look, I'm really sorry that I didn't get the cassette to you in time. That was just a postal strike, right? That was the only reason why this cassette turned late. And so this whole thing was around the grandma creating all these kind of, these problems for her. And the reason why is that the grandma actually wanted Asma to stay in the village, right? Because she was then a help, right? She wanted her to sort of have that, closeness with Asma and all the kind of, just basically part of her survival too, right? So so that part of that's sort of encoded, and she sort of talks about when the cassette, like when it's going to arrive, and she talked about when she received the previous one, and like the postman coming and just, what shall I do with these tears, and but yeah, it's slightly difficult to sort of make out these little what's going on in the cassettes themselves. But we thought we didn't want to just have a flat relay. This having this kind of this intense stereo left and right, it's a particular sort of feeling, and we can of course relay the audio straight, but that's, we don't want to do anything straight. We kind of want to challenge the kind of listening experience too. As artists, we want to respond to that in that kind of way. So this is a little bit of a scope for me to play around with this stuff, and I've done this quite a bit on actually quite a few of these recordings, and not just the cassettes themselves, but some of the kind of recording behaviors, even the sort of glitches, and of course, tape as a medium has its own fetishized sort of quality. So let me just do the final share with you, and this is really. We're not going to be playing any more videos. That's it. What I wanted to do was basically say thanks to these people. We have a ton of people that are kind of really behind this project, and it's incredible, really. The team that I've sort of been very fortunate to work with. So many people here, and this is only actually like half of the interview. This is only from the current lot, right? This is only from Tape Letters to the Nationwide project. And we have actually some of our volunteers who are on the project at the moment. They're here with us today. So thank you all. I've got to say, even though we have our regular weekly meetings, thank you so much again, for all the extraordinary work that you're doing. We have we've been in touch with the National the Heritage Fund about a follow-on project, which is going to be looking at the Scottish Pakistani, the Irish Pakistani, and the Welsh Pakistani behaviours around cassette tape usage. And I can't bloody wait to hear like Patwari, Glaswegian Patwari. It's going to be amazing. So we're looking at Tape Letters 3, and obviously, and we've sort of been given the green light for it. Obviously, we have to make a submission, and we're going to wait for their results. But it could be a really interesting thing to uncover, given the kind of discourse that's happening at the moment around identities within the UK itself. We understand there's a big movement for the Scottish independence movement with IndyRef 2 coming up, and all the mess that's going on with Brexit and in Ireland, and in fact some of the news about something like 40% of the Welsh population currently favour breaking up, separating from the UK, which is the highest it's ever been. So Tape Letters could be an interesting thing. Again, we're in discussions with some people in Edinburgh around tape letter usage, and we've found out that there are multiple migration routes. So it turns out that there's some people that moved to Huddersfield when they first came over here, and about 10 years later, loads of families moved over to Edinburgh and to Glasgow around that time. So it's really interesting to sort of see them, at the age of 5 or 10, having a really strong Scottish identity, right? Even though they may have sort of English, were born in England and have Pakistani, descent, right? So there's all these kind of intersectional sort of aspects to this project that's fantastic. So anyway, all of these people here, a huge amount of gratitude, to that. Feel free to check out the website itself. We've got some of this stuff on there. Check out the social media stuff. You can just email us and just say hello to me directly if you want to email me directly. Zosia will give us some more contact and information about that. We're obviously very proud and happy to be connected with the PHM because I'm a Mancunian and I love that space very much, and it's been a real sort of eye opener for me, in terms of understanding how to navigate this project as a sound artist. So thank you to the PHM.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those videos. I really love this project. So yeah, it's been amazing to listen and hear those tapes, and I love the idea of the fact that we just had a blank screen and I could just turn my camera off and listen. I didn't have to watch anything, which when working at home is very nice. So it was an online event that I actually wanted to join. It's been great. And if anybody has any questions or comments, if anyone is comfortable putting their camera back on and would like to speak about anything that we've seen this evening, then please do, and let us know. People are putting suggestions in the chat about organisations in Wales you might want to work with that have connections with South Asian communities in Wales. And I know there was Laurie earlier, who is also wanting to talk to you about a tape letter project in Burnley at some point as well. So yeah, there's lots of interest in your other projects.
Yeah.
But yeah, no questions. So you must have comprehensively covered everything about the project.
Oh, there you go. So Laurie's mentioned that they're working on something in a tape letter project they're working on in Burnley. So yeah, it'd be great.
Asif is asking if you're still collecting tapes.
We've put it. Yeah, we've put. Obviously, it's really useful for us to sort of include every single tape that we can get. There's a certain amount of resources that are that we attach to processing each one of these cassettes. Obviously, we have to digitize them and get them sent over to Pakistan, and our team sort of doing this stuff. So, and then it's a huge thing about analyzing all this stuff. But we are still collecting tapes because they really, we think they're valuable. I mean, obviously, these things are dated. They have they were developed in the 60s. And a lot of the times, they weren't ascribed much value, really. It's understandable, really. They're sort of meant to be sort of disposable. So a lot of the times they're just thrown away. And there's so many instances where we've heard of people going, "Oh yeah, we had a bag full of these things in the attic, and we've just cobbed them." Right? They weren't, we didn't think anything of them. But yeah, so for us, cassettes themselves are really valuable. So we know we can keep them safely. We think they're valuable objects now. They were pretty cheap, but. So we know how to process them. So yeah, if you do have a cassette tape, get in touch with us. We'll do it. We'll digitize it for you. We may not be able to sort of get it transcribed, but I love, we've got the resources, we've got the teams to do it. So we'll just have to gauge it by that, But yeah, yes, we're still collecting tapes.
Great. I hope that answers your question. And I noticed that Laurie had put a camera on. I didn't know whether she wanted to say something about the project in Burnley, or whether you were just saying hi, and so we knew what you looked like.
Oh, hang on, we can't. There we go.
Sorry, I'm walking around the house because I get really bad reception here, and when I turn the video and my camera on, it's rubbish. But yeah, no, it'd be really interesting to speak to you because we've been working with Rita Sattar in Dhaka for 3 years now, and she's been liaising with the Bangladeshi community in Burnley as part of British Textile Biennial. So it's very much around the relationships forged between the Indian subcontinent and East Lancashire through the cotton industry. And as part of that, Ritu is trying to collect cassette tape letters sent between Sylhet, the villages in Sylhet, and Burnley. Because the majority of the Bangladeshi population in Burnley are from Sylhet, as is Ritu herself. So, I mean, it's a kind of wider ranging sort of visual stroke performance art project, but cassette tapes is, she's collecting cassette tapes between those communities as part of that. So we're really fascinated by, the scope of your project and how you've collected the tapes and those relationships, and also just the technical stuff of how you digitize it and all that. So it'd be great to talk to you.
Certainly, absolutely. I mean, we actually, there's so many instances that we found out that Bangladeshi, communities, and Bengalis, on the Indian side and on sort of Bangladesh side, use this practice, right? So, I mean, part of me is sort of just focusing on the Patois region because there's a very particular reason as to why there was such an immigration route of immigration from that area. And something like about I don't know if this stat is accurate or not, but I read somewhere that something like about 70% of all the British Pakistanis in the UK can trace themselves to a particular region, the Patois region, right? And there's all sorts of interesting things of like, I mean, even the kind of Mangala Dam, this engineering sort of.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of the community, the Pakistani community in Pendle here, you know, around Nelson and Briarfield. That was on the back of the Mangala Dam displacement.
Yeah. Well, obviously, you know, Bangladesh was Pakistan, right? So there's there's stuff happening in 1970 that is part of it. So yeah, for sure, that I think for us that might be Tape Letters 4. The Tape Letters 3 at the moment is still kind of looking at the sort of the Pakistani side of the thing.
Yeah. No, I think, you know, if you wouldn't mind, it'd be lovely to pick your brains.
Of course, sure, absolutely. Just get in touch, and for sure we'll give
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Great, good bit of networking there. And we'll go to Callum next because he said on the chat that he's got a question. So.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks Wajid for that talk. That was and sharing the videos as well, because obviously, like working for Tape Letters and volunteering with you has been a real privilege so far. And this is maybe something we've kind of talked about, but I think be really interesting to hear more about. I know you've talked about a lot about exhibition work in the UK. But I'm wondering if there was any scope for kind of exhibition work in Pakistan and working with arts organizations in Pakistan, cultural organizations in Pakistan, and whether that would be of the same level of interest in that country for something like this, or like, because you were just talking about the way in which people used to just throw away tapes, was it not something that was, you know, considered as culturally significant? I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the other side of these things, because obviously we have such a kind of British perspective. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Pakistani perspective as well.
Sure. So obviously a lot of the cassettes that were recorded in the UK, they're not here, right? I mean, actually they were meant, they are where they were meant to be, which is, you know, back home, right? So so I've made a couple of trips to Pakistan on the back of this, actually pre-COVID and lockdown, and I sort of undertook some interviews there, and it's really sort of interesting to you know, we didn't manage to find a single cassette. Not because they're not there, it's because people are just not willing to pass them on to us, because we weren't able to establish that level of trust with them. They were like, okay, you've got ulterior motives for this stuff. We can't trust you with this stuff. You know, we can't trust you with the tapes. And it was very much a case of, oh, you know, it's funny. You'd come here, you know, a few months ago. We could have given you a bag full of these things, but you know, we just got rid of them, right? And we heard that in the UK a lot of the times, right? So what would happen is that we'd go, look, do you have any sort of cassettes? No, we don't have any at all. Okay, fine. We're not going to get an interview, any cassettes with you. Let's do an interview, right? 2 hours later, it'd be like, you know, funny you should say, actually, let me just have a little check. And they'd find these cassettes, right? So it meant that we had to do the interviews before we could get their trust about passing as a cassette. Even though we applied that approach in Pakistan, it still didn't work. Right, so we didn't manage to get any cassettes there, but we certainly had some really interesting interviews, and we've got some really interesting ideas about kind of what it was like for Pakistanis, and certainly what it was like for, you know, the impact of migration. Right, so if you've got families where individual members are coming over, and they're going to be the ones that are most capable, right, to provide for their families, then what does that mean for the families that are left behind? Right, so we understand that obviously. People like a dad, you know, they were only meant to be here for 3 or 4 years at a time, and then they'd go back, right? They'd work, they were constantly sending money home. But something happened in terms of the kind of the shape of the families there. So you got this drain of skill and talent and people, and just the heart of the communities, just bit by bit, piece by piece, time, you know, over time, just to the point where you've got actually like complete villages just completely closed and desolated, right? So so really interesting to have a look at the Pakistani side of things, right? And in response to your first question about Pakistani organisations, we've actually we have a partnership with the Citizens Archive of Pakistan, and they're really interested in partition, specifically, you know, they have partition a partition project. But we also have an exhibition lined up with the National History Museum in Pakistan. And we'd planned to put on an exhibition in February this year. We're still not able, we weren't obviously able to do that because of COVID. But we've had a talk with them a few weeks ago and demonstrated this online exhibition thing for them, and they were like, oh, so that's the plan. We're going to do that, and Tape Letters 3 will sort of do the physical exhibitions. But when I was in Pakistan last time around, I was invited to talk at Quaid-e-Azam University. Quaid-e-Azam was one of the founders of Pakistan, right? They have a university there. And it was just amazing for me, right, to sort of see that side of Pakistan. Because when I go to Pakistan, it's usually sort of in the village, in the small towns, and it's just family stuff. And what this project has allowed me to do is to really meet up with other people that are part of the kind of middle class strata and the liberal intellectual strata of Pakistan, which I never had access to, right? And so I was invited on the Quaid-e-Azam University campus to talk about this thing, and here you have your boys and girls kind of holding hands alongside women wearing a burqa and niqab, and so that was a real eye opener for me, seeing all that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to sort of doing more in Pakistan. Although Pakistan's bloody weird, it throws me because it's a high context society, right? So loads of things are just implicit in the way they do things. So if you don't know the code, then you're kind of an outsider, So everything's just expected, and that throws me. And people are just not on time. It just bloody bugs the hell out of me, man. so I find Pakistan really odd just because of that. And I'm a bit more sort of Germanic when it comes to timekeeping, but they just anyway. So it throws me on that, just the way things operate there. But yeah, I think we've got strong partnerships there now.
Great to hear we've got Tape Letters 3 and 4 in the pipeline. Yeah. I think that really brings to an end the event this evening. So thank you so much, Wajid, for sharing the project with us and hosting this Radical Late event with us as well. And I'll just quickly talk about some upcoming events and ways you can get involved at PHM after this. So we have a whole series of upcoming events at the People's History Museum. We have a regular once a month fabric workshop called Fabric of Protest, which is next on Saturday the 24th of April 2021. And our next Radical Late is Exploring Crossings, Community and Refuge, which is an event about the British Museum Spotlight loan of the Lampedusa Cross and the Syrian artist Issam Kabaja's work, Dark Water Burning World, which will be on display. Issam will be talking at the event, and we also have Ewan McLennan performing his songs as well, one of which won a BBC Folk Award named Lampedusa. And then if you have families, we've got lots of family activities. The next My First Protest song for under fives is on Zoom on the 1st of May. And we've got lots of online sketching resources for young people and adults. So just look for Doodle Den on our website. And then there's lots of ways to connect and support us beyond this event. Undertaking evaluation is really important. So for us and for projects like Tape Letters, we received external funding to be able to do our programming. And Michael is going to drop into the chat a link to our evaluation, which will just help us understand the impact we're making and help us strengthen our case to get further funding to do more work like this. And if you want to share your thoughts about tonight's event online by tagging our social media accounts there at the bottom, just use the hashtag Radical Late. You can sign up to our newsletter on our website, and you can also donate as well to help support our work. We also have PHM Shop. We'll send a discount code out to everyone who registered for this event by email, and you can now order online at shopphm.org.uk. So that's it from us. Thank you for joining us this evening, and I hope you've really enjoyed the event. And again, a big thank you to Wajid for sharing the project with us. It was really insightful and really, really interesting, and just to hear that those personal stories has just been a really lovely evening. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It really is a pleasure of mine to share it. So thank you so much, and thank you everybody for turning up. So
brilliant. Yeah, time to go home.